Joining us now, NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, Punchbowl News co-founder and MSNBC political contributor Jake Sherman, staff writer with The Atlantic Michael Shearer, and founder and CEO of Independent Veterans of America and host of Independent Americans podcast, Paul Rieckhoff. Garrett, this was a bit of a out of left field moment a couple minutes ago when Donald Trump announced this, because the news up until then was that Mike Waltz and his deputy were out.
Yeah, and I think it's still a bit of an open question whether we should consider this being pushed up or pushed out. On the one hand, being UN ambassador is a great title. It comes with a free apartment in New York City. You're Senate confirmed and still a member of the cabinet. But on the other hand, with Donald Trump more than any other president, certainly that I've covered, proximity is power. And Mike Waltz, who has an office in the West Wing and is here every day as one of the key strategic advisors for President Trump, had that proximity. Now he will not. He'll be based in New York, reporting to an organization, or reporting through, I suppose, an organization that the president has expressed nothing but disdain for throughout his political career. And instead, you now have Marco Rubio, who wears so many hats already within the Trump administration, adding one more, both an advising role as the national security advisor in the president's ear, but also a management role. There's something like 400 NSC employees who report up through the chain of command to the national security advisor. So a lot more on his plate for someone who's already spending a ton of time here at the West Wing.
How is it going to work, Michael, for Marco Rubio to be taking on these dual roles? I mentioned a moment ago that Henry Kissinger did it. My mouth is moving a little too fast. When he was working for Nixon. But the world has changed. Obviously, he had a lot on his plate, but the world is very complicated. Is it possible to do both of these things at once?
I think with President Trump, it is, just because of what Garrett just said. What matters is who's next to the president when these decisions are being made. And right now, Rubio has that position. He also has a sort of honorary title as head of the National Archives, which I'm not sure how much work he's been doing at as well. I think, what is clear here is that this is not a promotion for Mike Waltz. Even before he inadvertently added my boss to a Signal chat, there were tensions inside the White House with other White House staff who felt he was stepping outside of his lanes, was treating himself too much like a principal, not as much as staff, was coming into meetings he shouldn't be at, was trying to block other people from meetings they should be at. And that had created quite a bit of ill will. And then on top of that, you have this outside political pressure of people in the MAGA movement who felt he was too hawkish to be running President Trump's foreign policy, that was putting pressure on him. So there's just a lot of things were coming to bear. When we talked to President Trump last week at the Oval Office, we asked about Mike Waltz. He had just praised Pete Hegseth, said he thought he was going to do well. And when it came to Mike Waltz, he said he was just here, he's fine. And then he repeated that again. So it wasn't a ringing endorsement. I think this has been in the works for quite a while.
Is it possible also, Garrett, that part of the reason why Marco Rubio could do a dual role like this is because Steve Witkoff has taken on so much of what normally is assigned to a Secretary of State?
Yeah, it's not just Steve Witkoff. I mean, the Secretary of State job has been fractured in this administration, where you have Steve Witkoff flying around the world as a special presidential envoy. He's been focused on Russia and Ukraine, but also the conflict in Gaza with Israel and Hamas. You've got Rick Grenell, who's been working on issues in the Western Hemisphere, including in Venezuela, an issue that's always been close to Marco Rubio's heart. And you've got Elon Musk and Doge weighing in on how the department itself should be structured. So, yes, I think it's a fair observation to make that as his Secretary of State responsibilities have been kind of stripped away in little bits here and there, he's getting these other assignments added on.
Michael just mentioned that there are voices in Trump world that have been out to get Waltz, talking about how he's too much of a hawk for Donald Trump, not aligned on foreign policy. Let me play one of those voices. This is Laura Loomer from, I think, last week, talking about how she was trying to get Mike Waltz fired in the Oval Office, speaking to President Trump.
And it reminded me of a video that I've saved in my phone for many years of Michael Waltz on video speaking out against President Trump when he first ran for for president, accusing him of being against service members. And so, I was about to show this video to President Trump, and then Michael Waltz, walked into the Oval Office. So, there goes my conversation completely interrupted. Let's just play the video.
He essentially called anyone who was captured in combat a loser. It's something that I just personally can't stomach.
He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured.
Don't let Trump fool you. Look into his real record and stop Trump now.
I didn't go in there trying to get him fired. I was just making the point that I'm a Trump loyalist. I never said that I never campaigned against Trump. Michael Waltz was working with a PAC that was trying to actively campaign against Donald Trump in 2016. So my point is Michael Waltz is not going to have the same standard of loyalty that I have because he himself was a Trump hater. Right. So I was trying to explain that.
But how would that not make Trump want to fire him?
Well, I think it's important that President Trump see these things.
I'm not even going to ask a question, Paul. I'm just going to give that to you.
The chaos continues, and it continues to expand. Laura Loomer, involved in this entire conversation, is incomprehensible to me. She's a 9/11 conspiracy pusher. But take that and put it aside. When I initially saw the Waltz news, I said, OK, maybe there's finally some overdue accountability around Signalgate. Maybe that's what's happening here. But no, it turns out that Waltz maybe failed upward and now will be running the UN and putting Marco Rubio back in that situation with another job. By the end of the week, he might be Secretary of Defense, too. I mean, the real problem here is the ongoing chaos, the ongoing turnover in leadership, and our national security and our troops and our Pentagon are all in the crosshairs. And that has our national security apparatus, our troops concerned, and it has our enemies celebrating.
Garrett, I know you want to weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, look, Laura Loomer's been very aggressive with her views of who should be staffing the White House at basically every position. And I think it's important to remember, given that's her line of attack is about, Donald Trump as a candidate in 2016, whether Mike Waltz supported him. It is very true that Donald Trump values loyalty over almost everything else. I say almost because he values a convert oftentimes even more. And you don't have to believe me. You can ask his vice president. And so I'm not sure that those kinds of things are as damaging to Waltz as perhaps some of the performance-related issues around his job and Signalgate might have ultimately been.
All right, so Jake, let's talk more broadly about this. Waltz was somebody who had a safe seat in Congress. He was popular. The seat still remained with a Republican, but that support in that district was eaten away by Democrats. Elise Stefanik was going to be UN ambassador, but she is not being nominated any longer because they want to hold on to her seat. They're worried about majorities in the House. This chaos, how is it filtered down to how the House is doing its business and what they expect for the next couple of years?
Can I bring up a tangential point here, Katie,
Sure.
Which is, will Mike Waltz get confirmed as UN ambassador?
That's a really good point. He's going to have a confirmation.
I mean, let's talk about two facets of this. And I'm sorry to overtake your question here, but there's the first facet of whether he will get confirmed. I tend to think the answer is yes. I'm not very confident. This is all broken in the last hour or so. So I tend to think that even if nothing out of pity for the guy who left a very safe House seat and a seat that he would never lose, would never even be competitive for a couple months in the administration. That's the first thing to think about. The second thing to think about is why, in God's name, does the Trump administration want to reopen Signalgate up here, where there are members of the Senate, Republican members of the Senate? Roger Wicker called for an investigation into Signalgate. So why is it a smart legislative and political strategy to reignite that? I don't get it. And I also didn't get why Trump took 3 people from the House to begin with the margins that he had. So I don't understand it. I think he will get confirmed. But really, to be honest with you, this is a massive thumb in the eye, finger in the eye, whatever the saying is, to Elise Stefanik, who was nominated, was yanked, now is back in the House, has to fight for some committee slots again. And now Mike Waltz, who was in the administration, got booted and then got a plum job right afterwards. And no one has been more loyal to Donald Trump than Elise Stefanik over the last, 8 or so years.